Welcome to this week's Parsha Shiur, Parsha's Vayeitzei. If you're listening online and you would like the handout, please do email me at j.golker@gmail.com. I'll send you the handout. The Parsha begins, Vayeitzei Yaakov mi Beersheva vayelech Charana. That Yaakov Avinu left Beersheva and he went to Charan, says Rashi. Lo hayatzarich lichtov ele vayelech Yaakov Charana. Really, the Torah only needs to tell us where Yaakov was going, that he went to Charan. V'lama hiski yitziyasa. Why does it tell us where he left? Ella, says Rashi very famously, Magid sheyitzia tzaddik min hamokum, that the departure of a tzaddik from a place, oisa roshem, it makes an impression. Shebizman shetzaddik bo'ir, because when a tzaddik is in the city, hu haida, hu ziva, hu hadara, he is its beauty, its splendor, its majesty. Yotze misham, but when he leaves there, pona haida, pona ziva, pona hadara, the splendor, the majesty, the beauty has all departed. And so too you find a similar concept in the beginning of Megillas Rus, Parak Aleph there, when Naomi and Rus leave, it also says the same idea that the beauty, the splendor, the majesty of the place has also left because of the departure of the tzaddik. And the question that we've raised in the past is, why are we told this now? It's not the first time that tzaddik has left a place. Avram and Yitzchak have traveled extensively. Why are we told this in reference to Yaakov, and why now? And that's a question we've actually asked in previous years. 3 years ago we discussed the Kliyaka. 2 years ago I presented the answer from Rabbi Baruch Jalowski. And last year, based on the Ramban, different approaches of Avodah, of Avraham and Yitzchak on the one hand and Yaakov on the other, and we answered it in that way. But this year I'd like to present to you an answer of the Ur Yasha. I don't actually know who that is. And I've got it here, I came across it, I'm not sure how, but a very interesting approach. Let's look at it inside. If you go to the second paragraph, he makes reference to that kliyaka we spoke about 3 years ago. Why is it we're not told this fact, that when a tzaddik leaves a place, it leaves an impression, the beauty, the majesty, the splendor of the place has diminished? Why aren't we told that in reference to Avram when he traveled? And see there the Kliyaka who answers it in his way. Well, Anivas Daitinir says the Ur Yasha. In my humble opinion, I can answer it differently. According to the opinion brought in the Sefer Magalit Tzedek, to Beis Hamedrash of Shem Ve'eva Hoy Be'Beersheva. The Beis Hamedrash of Shem Ve'eva, where Yaakov Avinu went to immediately after the incident of last week's Sedra. When he escaped from Esav, after the story of the brachas, he went to learn in the yeshiva of Shem Ve'eva for 14 years. Where was that yeshiva? According to one opinion he brings here, in the same city, in Beersheva. So he didn't leave anywhere. Therefore, when Yaakov left the presence of Yitzchak and said goodbye to him at the end of last week's Sedra, he didn't leave town. That he actually stayed in Beersheva, but he went and he immersed himself in the yeshiva of Shem Ve'eva. And when he was there, he was totally disconnected from the locals, from the town, and he had no connection with people. And therefore, had I been told this concept with Avraham, that the Yitzir, the departure of a tzaddik, leaves an impression, because I would have thought, yes, I understand why the impression is made when a tzaddik leaves a town, is because after all the tzaddik is going to have be a feature in that town. He's going to rebuke the people, and guide them in the correct way, and advise them positively. But that's not relevant to Yaakov Avinu. Because for those 14 years, the last 14 years that he was immersed in the Beis HaMedrash, he had nothing to do with any resident of Beersheva. And yet, nevertheless, when he left 14 years later, that nevertheless, when he left, it still took away from the beauty and the splendor of the town, as if when he was there more clearly, more apparently. Because his righteousness illuminated the city, be'etzem, ach shelo haya mu'urav bohem. Even though he wasn't sort of intermingling with them and present out and about, klal v'klal, nevertheless, his presence was somehow felt spiritually. And that is the chiddush. That's why we're told it over here, that even though he wasn't, had no connection at all with the city and with the people of the city for 14 years, still, when he left after those 14 years, it made an impression to some degree. And that's the point. So too, that's Rashi's point when he says that the same is true with regard to Nami and Rus. A woman is going to behave in a more sort of discreet, modest way, that her presence in the city is not going to be as blatant as it would be for Avram and Yitzchak, for males. She's not going to stand up in shul and start giving sheklali and start giving musadrashas. Nevertheless, it says about Nami, and so too the idea is the same. The beauty, the majesty, the splendor of the city is reduced after she leaves. And understand this well because it's a novel way of understanding it. So, says the Aryasha, very interestingly, that Yaakov Avinu actually, according to one opinion, stayed in Beersheba because that's where the yeshiva of Shem Ve'eva was. And therefore, I might have thought that he wasn't out and about, and therefore his departure would not be noticed. Kamash Malon, that the chiddush is that even though he wasn't out and about for the last 14 years, still his very presence somehow made an impression, and his departure therefore was felt. And that is exactly what you see with Nami, who again, her presence was not sort of actively felt. She wouldn't stand up in public and rebuke and speak and be an active, sort of a very visible presence, but yet her departure was also felt. Now, he carries on and says the following, and this is the next paragraph. Now, with all of this, we can explain a very interesting pasuk in next week's Sedra, in Parshas Vayishlach. After the whole story in this week's Sedra, when he's in the house of Lavan for all those years, Nemar Vayover Yaakov Sholem Ir Shechem. The pasuk tells us that Yaakov Avinu returns to the city of Shechem, Asher be'eretz Canaan b'voyim Padan Aram, Vayichon es pnei ha'ir, and he camped in the face of the city. The high es pnei ein lo havona. That word in next week's Sedra, es pnei ha'ir, is hard to explain, is hard to interpret. He encamped in front of the city, before the city. What does it mean, es pnei ha'ir? Well, and according to what we've said just now, you can say the following. It teaches us the tremendous, lofty spiritual height of Yaakov Avinu. Also Roshem, that his departure made an impression. The whole beauty of the city has departed when he left. It's teaching us that when he returned 20 years later, after having been in the house of Lavan for 20 years, having previously been 14 years, when he eventually returned to Beersheba after all that time, and despite being in the house of Rasha, in the house of Lavan, he still maintained his holy standards, and he still maintained his spiritual status, that his chen, his majesty and splendor filled the city. As soon as he arrived in town, then that splendor, that majesty came back. Not because he was an active physical presence in town, or he stood up in public and started giving drashas and rebuking them and guiding them. His very presence in town elevated the town. The very coming into the town illuminated the whole town. And therefore the pasuk is very exact. Yaakov Sholem. That's what it says in next week's Sedra. That Yaakov Avinu came Sholem. What does it mean? Complete. But Tzidkosai, in his righteousness. In other words, having been exposed to a wicked Lavan for 20 years, his Tzidkus, his righteousness, was still fully intact. Ir Shechem Be'er Eretz Canaan, Ba'isa Aretz Asher Yotz Misham. He went back to the place where he had left previously. V'omar b'boim padnaram mokum lovon v'anshe reshem mikol mokum v'yichan es pnei ha'ir. But still, having returned to that same city, Beersheva, v'yichan es pnei ha'ir, he illuminated the city. The chen of Yaakov Avinu, the spiritual splendor and majesty of Yaakov Avinu, was illuminated the town. V'yisparish milas v'yichan es pnei ha'ir, and now that explains the lashon of v'yichan es pnei ha'ir. He illuminated all the town. And that he had maintained that tzidkus, that righteous level that he had left on all those years earlier. Last paragraph. And now we can explain another answer to the Kliyako's question, i.e., that we're specifically told this concept with Yaakov Avinu, not with Avram and not with Yitzchak, because the Torah wants to teach us. On the day that Yaakov Avinu returned, 36 years later, after having left Yitzchak and Rivka and been in yeshiva of Shem Ve'ev 14 years, and then 22 years, including the travel with Lavan, that he maintained that lofty level of tzidkus that he was on previously. And he wasn't solid in any way in the house of Lavan, the wicked. And therefore, the Torah teaches us that just like when he left Beersheva, it made an impression, that it's able therefore to teach us, when he returns all those years later, that his return to the city restores that impression that was once there. So and therefore we're told this idea specifically with Yaakov Avinu. Very nice, very beautiful interpretation of the Ariyasha. Okay, let's press on. Now, the next idea I have said before, I think it was in 2021, but I came across it again in the sefer that I quoted last week, this new sefer that I've got, the base of Rabbi Yaakov Schlesinger. He should live and be well. He's a man, Baruch Hashem, in his second century. There's a Rosh Yeshiva in Stamford Hill, and his son is a Rosh Yeshiva, is a Rav and Rosh Yeshiva here in Golders Green. And so I've managed to get hold of the sefer. So again, I'm like I said last week, I'm going to try and look for some ideas in this fabulous new sefer. And I came across an idea which I said in 2021, but I think I misattributed some of the ideas to different people, so I want to just clarify who said what, and I checked it with the Beis Av's son, Rabbi Yaakov Schlesinger, and I'll explain exactly who says what coming up, but it's a fabulous idea. Let's take a look at the Pesukim. So we're at the very beginning of the Sedra, Perek Chof Ches, Pasuk Yud. Says the Pasuk, Vayeitzei Yaakov me Beersheva, Vayelech Choron. So Yaakov Avinu leaves Beersheva and he goes to Choron. Vayivka ba'mokim, and he arrives at the place Kiva HaShemesh, because the sun set. Vayikach me'av me'amokim vayosim me'ashosov, and he takes from the stones of the place and he puts it around his head. Vayishkav ba'mokim hahu, and he sleeps in that place. Vayachaloim, and Yaakov Avinu has his famous dream. V'hinei sulam mutzov arza, there is a ladder whose foot is rested on the ground. V'roishe magia hashamayma, on the top of the ladder is reaching the heavens. V'hinei malachei elokim olim v'yardim by, and the angels of HaKadosh Baruch Hu are going up and down this ladder. V'hinei Hashem nitzov olav, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu was standing over him. Vayomar, and he says, Ani Hashem Elokei Avram Avicha Elokei Yitzchak Haaretz Asher Ata Sheichev Oleh Lecha Etneno Olezarecha. And he has the most remarkable dream. HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells him wonderful assurances. The land upon which you are sleeping, I'm going to, and I promised to your father, your grandfather Avraham, and to your father Yitzchak, I'm going to give it to you and to your descendants. And your children will be numerous like the dust of the ground. And you will spread in all four directions. And all the families of the earth will be blessed through you and through your offspring. And I'm going to be with you. And I'm going to be with you, and you're going to return here. Because I'm not going to abandon you. Until that I've fulfilled what I've said to you. So it's the most remarkable, beautiful, uplifting dream that anyone could ever have. This was music to Yaakov Avinu's ears. Now, listen to this. What happens? Yaakov Avinu wakes up. Vayikat Yaakov mishnasei. Yaakov Avinu wakes up from his sleep. Vayomer ochein yesh Hashem b'makom hazeh. Whoa! I didn't realize HaKadosh Baruch Hu is here. This is holy. This is a holy place. Vanoichi lo yadati. I didn't know. Vayira vayomer, and he was worried, and he said, Manora hamokom hazeh. How awesome is this place? Ein zeh ki im beis Elokim v'zeh shah hashamayim. This must be the shah hashamayim. Fine, says Rashi. I didn't know this was such a holy place. Says Rashi, She'ilu yadaiti, because had I known, lo yashanti b'mokum kodesh kazeh. Because had I known, I wouldn't have gone to sleep here. That would have been totally inappropriate. But now I didn't realize that, and therefore, had I known, I wouldn't have slept here. Says the base of Kosuv b'sfas emes. This, if you take a look here in this short paragraph from the base of, the sfas emes says, what does that mean, had I known? Says, She'ilu yoda, because had I known, Kedushas Hamokim, the holiness of this place, Hoya Oisik B'Torah, I would have learned the whole night. That's what he was doing the last 14 years. And then there's an abbreviation. I must be honest with you, I had to ask around what it stood for. I'm still not 100% sure, but it says, Base Hey Ayin Daled. My research seems to suggest that it's referring to the Sefer HaIkrim. If anybody knows differently, then please let me know. But whoever says this, whether it's the Sefer HaIkrim or someone else, Kosav Shohim Mispalel, no, had he known, he would have davened there. So either way, he wouldn't have slept, he would have learned, or he would have davened. Okay, V'tzorich bil, here comes the question. Soif, at the end of the day, Al Yedei Sheinosai, through his sleep and through his dream, Zocher Lemar Nevuah, he merited to have the most remarkable nevuah. Those words from HaKadosh Baruch Hu are not just a nice dream, but are a most majestic prophecy for the future. How could he therefore have regretted this sleep? Yaakov Avinu goes to sleep, gets the most remarkable bracha, he wakes up, his response seems very strange. That the manora hamokum zeh ein zakim beis Elokim. Noichi lo yadaiti. I didn't know. Says Rashi, she'ilu yadaiti lo yashanti. Had I known, I wouldn't have gone to sleep here. Says the sfas emes, he would have stayed up and learned. Says the Sefer Ikrim, he would have davened all night. But you would have missed the most remarkable nevuah, which is gold dust, promising the land to your descendants, assuring comfort and HaKadosh Baruch Hu staying with him and protection and presence. Well, what does it mean? Why does Yaakov Avinu regret going to sleep and missing out on this unbelievable nevuah? Listen to this unbelievable answer. V'shamaiti habiur, and I heard the biur. Now, the Beis Av doesn't say who, but I checked with the B'Yoshim Schlesinger, he's the son of the Beis Av, and he says this is the brisker of. Okay? V'shamaiti habiur, shezeh mare al geder yiraschet. This is a benchmark in yiraschet. She'im asa leishem b'mokum zeh. Because if halacha says that it's asa to sleep in this place, at the end of the day, if it's asa, it's asa, and whatever the majesty of this dream is, that doesn't justify violating halacha. If you can't sleep there, you can't sleep there. End of. This, then a few years ago, I sushdel that I connected that to an amazing insight in the Gemara in Bava Metzia, and a Tosfos in Bava Metzia, and that I said was the brisker of, but I was wrong. This idea is actually Rabbi Yochum Schlesinger's son, Rabbi Shai Schlesinger, who lives here in Golders Green. Let me share with you this magnificent idea. The Gemara says in Bava Metzia the following story. Says the Gemara in Bava Metzia, this is in Pei Hey Omid Beis. Eliyahu have a shkiach b'mesifta de Rebbe. The Gemara tells a story regarding Eliyahu Novi, that he was often found in the Beis HaMedrash of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, Rabbi, the famous redactor, the editor of the Mishnah. Yom Echad, one day, Reish Yachava, it was Rosh Chodesh, Noga Lei V'Lei Osa, and Eliyahu was delayed and he didn't come to the Beis HaMedrash. Also, Omer Lei, so later, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, Rabbi, said to Eliyahu Novi, my time in Noga Lei Lemar, why were you delayed? So Omer Lei said, Eliyahu Novi replied to Rabbi and said, Adoikimne la'Avram Umishene yodei umatzli magnile. Because I had to wake up Avram Avinu, and I had to wash his hands, and I had to wait for him to daven, and then lay him down again. V'chein li Yitzchak, v'chein li Yaakov, and so too, I had to follow the same procedure for Yitzchak and for Yaakov. V'luk minu ba'adei adodi. So Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said, why didn't you wake them all together? Why didn't you wake Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov all together? So Eliyahu Novi responded and said, Savri takvi barachmi u'maiseli l'mashiach b'lo izmani. Eliyahu responded and said, if I were to wake all three of them and they were to daven at the same time, that would generate such a powerful tefillah that would bring Moshiach prematurely. Okay? Omalei, so Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said to Eliyahu Novi, V'yesh dugmosen ba'olam hazeh. Is there anyone in this world who is comparable, i.e., whose tefillahs are so powerful that they could also bring Moshiach? Amalei, so Eliyahu Novi said, yeah, Ikar Rabbi Chia Ubonov. Rabbi Chia and his sons, their tefillah is so powerful that they can also bring Moshiach. Gaza Rebbe Tanisa, the Gemara continues, the Rebbe was Goizer Tanis, he decreed a fast, Achsinu LeRebbi Chia Ubonov. And he brought Rabbi Chia and his sons down to the Omud to daven. So Omar Mashiv HaRuach Unosh Vazika. They said Mashiv HaRuach, and the wind started blowing. Omar Merid HaGeshem. Rabbi Chia said the next phrase of Merid HaGeshem, and then Va'asa Mitra, and the rain came. Kimota Lameima Machayim Esim, and then when Rabbi Chia was about to say Machayim Esim, Ragash Alma, then the world started trembling. Omri Birakia, they said in Shemaim, Man Goli Razia Ba'alma, who is revealing the secrets in the world? Omri Eliyahu Novi is revealing these secrets because he told Rebbe to go and get Rabbi Chia to daven for the Omid. Asyuel Eliyahu, whereupon they brought back Eliyahu Novi to Shemaim, Machiu Shisin Pulsi Denura, and they beat him with 60 fiery lashes. Also Idmile Kedubab Denura, and Eliyahu Novi came back to this world disguised as a bear in the form of a fire. Ol Benayu v'Tradinu, and he sort of came into that shul where Rabbi Chia was davening, and he distracted them from their tefillah, and that prevented Rabbi Chia from reciting the phrase of Machayim Esim. Okay, end of Gemara. A very interesting Gemara that Rebbe asked Eliyahu Novi who has the power of tefillah like the Avos, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. It was Rabbi Chia and his sons, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda Nasi got Rabbi Chia to daven for the Omid, and they were very close to bringing Moshiach, but that secret was revealed, and therefore Eliyahu Novi was brought back to Shemaim. He was punished, and then he came down again to frustrate the tefillah of Rabbi Chia. Ad kan the Gemara. Says Tosfos there in Gemara in Bava Metzia. Achdinu Rabbi Chia Bonov. Va'af al gav the Toni b'Megillah ein meridin ifnei ateva lo me'anshe Chaifa v'lo me'anshe Beis Shan. The Gemara says in Megillah that you're not allowed to have someone lead for the Omid, be the Shliach Tzibur, not from a place called Chaifa, not from a place called Beis Shan. Why? Shekarin la'alfin ainin la'ainin alfin. Because they mix up their alefs and ayins. Now we can hardly tell the difference. But in the real pronunciation, sometimes you go to a person who's with a Sephardi who can really, with a very guttural ayin, and it's very different to the aleph. But strictly speaking, that's how you should do it. And therefore, in these places, they confuse. You couldn't ascertain what's an ayin and what's an aleph, and therefore you shouldn't let them daven for the omid. And he wasn't able to say v'chikisi because he couldn't pronounce the words properly. So says Tosfos, how could Rebbe appoint Rabbi Chia to be the Shliach Tzibur because he fell foul of this standard of being able to pronounce all the words accurately? So Tosfos gives his answer, because there was no one else, etc., etc. Asks Rabbi Yishai Schlesinger, what is Tosfos kasha? So he couldn't pronounce the words perfectly. But at the end of the day, he could bring Moshiach. Maybe that's worth it. Isn't it worth it to bring Moshiach and to have a Baal Tefillah who gets a few of the words wrong and doesn't pronounce it accurately? Says Rabbi Yishai Schlesinger, exactly the same answer that we saw from the Brisker of in this week's Sedra. The ends don't justify the means. Of course, the end of bringing Moshiach is something everyone longs for. But if the means to do that is to violate halacha, then the ends do not justify the ends, and the means are not justified to reach that end. If a Sif Katan says he cannot daven, then he cannot daven. And you cannot violate halacha, however important the ends are. And that's really the point. And Yaakov Avinu was saying, yes, I understood that this dream was magnificent, and it was worth it, and it will guarantee the future of the Jewish people, etc., etc. But at the end of the day, if this is a holy place where I shouldn't have davened, I shouldn't have slept, then I shouldn't have gone to sleep. And that's what he means. That V'anochi lo yadaiti, says Rashi, she'ili yadaiti lo yashanti b'makom kodesh kazeh. Had I known, I wouldn't have slept here. You would have missed out on such a dream? Yeah, so be it. Because I cannot violate halacha. And regardless of what I miss out on, a majestic nevuah, or whatever it may be, then so be it. That's the importance of not violating halacha. Remarkable. Okay, let's just finish off with one more idea. This is later on in the Sedra. The Pasuk says, this is in Perek Lamed Aleph, Pasuk Lamed Hey, the last box, paragraph 3 on the handout. So, the Pasuk says, V'atome el aviha. This is now when Yaakov Avinu is now married. He has 4 wives. He started to build a family, and he feels that it's time to leave the house of Lavan. So he goes away. He famously leaves the house of Lavan. Lavan chases after him, and there you have that fascinating dialogue. And Lavan realizes his avodah zarah, his idols have been taken, and he starts searching for them. Says the pasuk, "V'atome el aviha," and he suspects Rachel has taken them. And he starts searching in her tent, and he starts searching and speaking to her about it. V'atome el aviha, and the pasuk says that she said to her father, Rachel said to her father Lavan, "Al yichar be'ena adoni, don't be upset with me. Ki lo uchel lakum miponecha, I cannot get up from the camel. Ki derech noshim li, because it's the way of women with me, i.e. she's menstruating. Vayechapes v'lo motzo es hatrofim, and he continues to search and he cannot find the trofim." And the Mefarshim are a bit sort of bemused by these words. Ki derech noshim li. Was Rachel lying? Was she just trying to sort of save face because she did take the trofim, she did take the idols? Was it just a ruse to keep her father Lavan away from the idols? And the Mefarshim struggle with the concept that the Imahos would lie. So I came across 2 ideas. It's the same idea, but from 2 different sources. One is the Kol Eliyahu, the Vilna Gaon's Torah, and one is the Chanukas HaTorah. And they both say the same thing. Let's go through the Kol Eliyahu first. Kedei lahatzles Rachel imenu misvah sheker. In order to avoid the conclusion that Rachel imenu lied, yesh loima, one can interpret the pasuk as follows: She Rachel kivna beremez lamashe lokha trofim. This is what she was alluding to. She was alluding to this. Shahayu ovdei avodah zarah. The kvar amru chazal, because the Gemara says in Shabbos, daf pei beis in Perek Rabbi Akiva, da avodah zarah matame kenida. That avodah zarah is matame in the same level, the same status as a nida. V'zeu shomer Rachel ki derech noshim li. That's what Rachel Imenu meant when she said derech noshim li, that she has the status of a nida. Shahari lokcha trofim. She was alluding to the fact that she took the trofim. V'shach ba'aleim, and was sitting on top of them. V'imkein matame kamonid, and therefore she was matame in the same way that a nida is matame, because she was there with the avodah zarah. And says the Chanukas, so she wasn't lying. That's what she meant. She was alluding to this idea. And the Chanukas HaTorah says the same thing as well. The Chanukas HaTorah is Avram Yeshua Heschel from Krakow. If you've ever been to the Ramah cemetery just behind the shul in Krakow, behind the Ramah shul, you probably would have seen his keva there. We go every year and we take the school, and I've davened at his keva many times. He took over the Rabbonos in Krakow from the Tosfos Yontov in 1654. He was previously the Rav in Lublin, and famously he was the Rebbe of the Shach. He died in 1663, and he was the Rav in Krakow for nearly a decade, and he's buried there in the back of the Beis HaKvaros, there in the Ramah Shul, just behind the Ramah Shul. So the Chanukas HaTorah says the following: "B'pasuk v'atoim elovia al yicha be'eni adoni ki lo echolokum miponecha g'derech noshim li yesh lefarish al pi mad de'isa b'gemara." We can explain it the same as what the Vilna Gaon says. Minayin avodah zarah shemetameh. How do you know avodah zarah is metameh? Man nida metameh b'maso, kach avodah zarah metameh b'maso. Just like a nida is metameh with the things she carries, so too avodah zarah is metameh b'maso. Nishma mizeh sh'avodah zarah v'nidza din echad lehem. They have the same din regarding tumah. V'hinei Rachel ganva hatrofim, and Rachel stole the idols l'salek es avia mios akum, in order to disconnect her father from worshipping idols. Uchadei shelo sadek ezu nichsheles l'shaker, and therefore to avoid the problem of her lying, neged avia ba'am ki lo yochel lakum miponecha mishum hachi ramzalei shetumas nida aleha. And therefore she alluded to the fact that she has tumas nida, and she wasn't lying. She was intimating and saying she had tuma underneath her like a nida, as if she was menstruating. They have the same status. But he, Lavan, misunderstood it and thought that kapshuta, that's what she meant. But that's actually not what she meant. So two different sources saying the same thing, which explains that Rachel Menu was not lying, but she was alluding to the fact that the tumah is the same status as a nida, and that's what she actually did. Okay, let's so just to summarize, what have we said? 3 ideas. Number 1, Vayeitzei Yaakov Beersheva Vayelech Charana, the famous Rashi, that why are we told? Why shouldn't the apostle just say Vayelech Charana, Vayelech Yaakov Charana? Why are we told about his Yitzia? So famously, Rashi said, Magid she'Yitzia Tzadik min hamokom v'Yisrael. When a tzaddik leaves a place, it leaves an impression. Shebizman she'Tzadik bo'ir. When a tzaddik is in a city, who Haida, Ziva, V'Hadra, etc., etc. And we've had different approaches over the years, and this year we suggested the idea of the Aryasha, which, as explained above, which also answers the kasha of why Dafka here and now, why not tell us this with Avram and others, but specifically with regard to Yaakov Avinu, and the Chiddush is that he was in Beersheva still, for those 14 years, and still it made an impression, and that's why Rashi connects it and gives another reference to Nami, because the idea is the same, that they weren't physically present, as it were, in the same way that Avraham Yitzchak would have been, and still the effect was there, and that explains the pasuk also in Parshas Vayishlach. And then we said that fabulous idea from Rabbi Yaakov Schlesinger that halacha is halacha, that Yaakov Avinu says when he wakes up from his dream, V'anochi lo yadaiti, and Rashi tells us that had he known, she'ilu yadaiti lo yashanti b'makom kodesh kazeh, I would have missed out on this unbelievable dream, so be it. Says the Briskerov, so be it. Halacha is halacha, and if it means violating a sif katan in Shulchan Aruch, we don't do that. And Rabbi Yaakov Schlesinger, son, Rabbi Shai Schlesinger, connects that amazingly to the Tosfos in Bava Metzia, that Rabbi Chia was very close to bring Mashiach, but the Tosfos asks, how could he appoint him? He doesn't say the words. It violates the Gemara and Megillah. If you can't speak articulately and pronounce all the words properly, so then you shouldn't be davening for the Omid. So the answer is, how can Tosfos ask that question? The answer, surely it's worth it to get Mashiach to come. Again, the same thing, that the ends don't justify the means. And then lastly, to explain that Rachel Menu wasn't really lying. It wasn't just a ruse to keep her father away from Avodah Zarah, but she was hinting to the fact that she did take the idols, and it was she just spoke derech noshim li because it had the same status of tumah, but she wasn't actually lying. But her father didn't pick up on this hint, but it just explains how the Amos were not lying, but that's what she was referring to. Okay.